The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Windsor Castle as King Charles sat in his private study, reading through the day's schedule. His secretary had just informed him that Kate, the Princess of Wales, would be joining him for their weekly meeting about royal duties. Charles smiled slightly, something that had become more common whenever Kate's name was mentioned. Over the past few months, Charles had grown increasingly fond of his daughter-in-law. Unlike the formal relationships he had with many family members, his bond with Kate felt natural and warm. She reminded him of his late mother, Queen Elizabeth, in many ways. Kate had the same quiet strength, the same ability to listen without judgment, and the same dedication to duty that Charles deeply respected. When Kate arrived at the study, she knocked gently before entering. Charles looked up from his papers and gestured for her to sit in the comfortable chair across from his desk. "Kate, my dear, please come in. I've been looking forward to our chat." Kate settled into the chair, her posture relaxed but respectful. She had always felt comfortable around Charles even before she married William. There was something grandfatherly about him, despite being her father-in-law. "Thank you, Your Majesty. I brought the reports you requested about the children's charity work." As they discussed various royal engagements and charitable initiatives, Charles found himself genuinely enjoying the conversation. Kate had a way of presenting ideas that was both thoughtful and practical. She never pushed her opinions too forcefully, but she wasn't afraid to disagree when she felt strongly about something. "I've been thinking about your suggestion regarding the mental health awareness campaign," Charles said, leaning back in his chair. "I believe you're absolutely right. We need to reach younger audiences, and your approach would be perfect for that." Kate's face lit up with genuine pleasure. "I'm so glad you think so. I know it's important to you to modernize some of our approaches while still maintaining tradition." What Charles appreciated most about Kate was her understanding of the delicate balance required in royal life. She seemed to grasp instinctively when to follow protocol and when flexibility was needed. This wisdom was something that had taken Charles decades to develop, yet Kate appeared to possess it naturally. Meanwhile, in another wing of the castle, Queen Camilla was having her own morning routine. She sat at her dressing table, applying her makeup with practiced precision. Her lady-in-waiting stood nearby, holding Camilla's jewelry for the day's engagements. "Your Majesty, the car will be ready in 30 minutes for your visit to the Literacy Center," the aide said softly. Camilla nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She had noticed subtle changes in the palace dynamics over recent months. Charles seemed more animated when he spoke about his activities with Kate. Their meetings had become longer and more frequent. While Camilla had initially been pleased that Charles was building stronger relationships with his children-in-law, she couldn't help but feel a small pang of something she couldn't quite identify. The relationship between Camilla and Kate had always been cordial, but somewhat distant. They respected each other and worked well together during joint engagements, but they had never developed the close bond that some had hoped for. Kate was polite and professional with Camilla, but there was a reserve there that Camilla sometimes found difficult to bridge. As Camilla prepared for her day, she reflected on how different her position was from what she had imagined. Being queen consort was fulfilling in many ways, but it also came with unexpected challenges. She had worked hard to earn public acceptance and support, and she had largely succeeded. However, she sometimes felt like she was still proving herself, even after all these years. The truth was that Camilla had always been aware that her relationship with Charles existed in the shadow of his first marriage to Diana. While that chapter was long closed, the public's memory was long, and comparisons were inevitable. Kate, as William's wife and Diana's daughter-in-law, occupied a unique position that Camilla could never fully understand or share. Later that afternoon, Charles and Kate were walking through the palace gardens, discussing plans for an upcoming state visit. Their conversation flowed easily from serious diplomatic matters to lighter topics about family life. Charles found himself sharing stories about his own childhood and his relationship with his mother. "You know, Kate, you have a gift for bringing out the best in people," Charles said as they paused beside a fountain. "William is fortunate to have you, and so are we as a family." Kate blushed slightly at the compliment. "That's very kind of you to say. I've learned so much from watching how you handle the responsibilities of the crown. Your dedication is truly inspiring." Their mutual respect and growing affection was evident to anyone who observed them together. Palace staff had begun to notice how Charles's demeanor changed when Kate was around. He seemed more relaxed, more willing to laugh, and more open to new ideas. It was as if Kate brought out a side of him that had been dormant for years. The palace staff had begun to whisper among themselves about the changing dynamics within the royal family. Mrs. Henderson, who had served as a housekeeper for over 20 years, noticed it first during the weekly staff meetings. When discussing arrangements for royal engagements, Charles's private secretary would often mention how His Majesty specifically requested the Princess of Wales be included in various events. Sarah, one of the younger maids, confided to her colleague during their tea break, "Have you seen how the king's face lights up when Princess Catherine arrives for their meetings? It's like watching a grandfather with his favorite grandchild." These observations weren't malicious gossip, but rather the natural notice of people who had worked closely with the royal family for years. They could sense shifts in mood and relationships with the sensitivity that comes from daily proximity to their employers. Charles had indeed begun to rely more heavily on Kate's input for various royal matters. He valued her perspective on modernizing certain traditions, while maintaining the dignity and respect the monarchy required. Kate had a natural ability to bridge generational gaps, understanding both the weight of royal history and the needs of contemporary society. During one particularly meaningful conversation, Charles had opened up to Kate about his fears and hopes for the future of the monarchy. "Sometimes I worry about whether we're staying relevant to the people we serve," he admitted as they reviewed plans for a series of community visits. Kate listened thoughtfully before responding. "I think the key is showing people that we're not just symbols, but that we genuinely care about their daily struggles and dreams. When we visit that housing project next week, maybe we could spend extra time just talking with families, learning about their real experiences." Charles was struck by the wisdom in her words. Kate had an instinct for connecting with people that he sometimes envied. She could make anyone feel comfortable and heard, whether she was speaking with world leaders or chatting with children at a school visit. Meanwhile, Camilla was experiencing a gradual but noticeable shift in her own role within the family structure. It wasn't that she was being deliberately excluded, but rather that certain conversations and decisions seemed to happen without her input. She would sometimes arrive at family gatherings to find that Charles and Kate had already discussed and planned various initiatives. The change became more apparent during a family dinner at Highgrove House. Charles was enthusiastically describing a new environmental project that he and Kate had conceived together. His eyes were bright with excitement as he explained their vision for sustainable farming education programs. Kate suggested we partner with local schools to create hands-on learning experiences, Charles said, turning to Kate with obvious pride. "It's exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need." Camilla smiled and nodded appropriately, but she couldn't help feeling like an observer rather than a participant in the conversation. She had her own causes and expertise, particularly in literacy and domestic violence awareness, but somehow these felt separate from the growing partnership between Charles and Kate. William had also begun to notice the special bond developing between his father and his wife. Rather than feeling concerned, he was actually pleased to see how well they got along. He knew that Kate's relationship with Charles was making his own relationship with his father stronger too. "Dad really values Kate's opinion," William mentioned to Harry during one of their phone calls. "I think she reminds him of Granny in some ways. She has that same quiet confidence and natural wisdom." Harry, despite his own complicated relationship with the family, was glad to hear that Kate was finding her place and making positive connections. "She's always been good at bringing people together," he replied. "I'm not surprised she and Dad get along well." The public had also begun to notice the obvious warmth between Charles and Kate during their joint appearances. Royal watchers and photographers commented on how natural they seemed together, how easily they laughed at each other's jokes, and how Charles would often defer to Kate's lead when they were interacting with crowds. One particularly touching moment occurred during a visit to a children's hospital. Charles was initially somewhat stiff and formal with the young patients, as he often was when uncertain how to connect. Kate gently encouraged him to sit on the floor with the children and join their game. The resulting photographs showed Charles genuinely laughing and playing, with Kate beside him, both of them completely absorbed in bringing joy to the sick children. That evening, as they traveled back to London together, Charles turned to Kate with genuine gratitude. "Thank you for helping me connect with those children today. I sometimes forget that being royal doesn't mean we have to be distant." Kate smiled warmly. "You have such a kind heart. Sometimes you just need permission to show it more freely." These moments of connection were becoming more frequent and more meaningful. Charles was discovering that Kate could help him be the kind of king he wanted to be, approachable, caring, and truly connected to his people. For Kate, these interactions with Charles were helping her understand the deeper responsibilities and opportunities that came with her royal role. As autumn deepened into winter, the bond between them continued to strengthen, while Camilla found herself adjusting to a role that felt increasingly peripheral to the core relationship developing between the king and his daughter-in-law. The Christmas season brought the royal family together at Sandringham, and the holiday atmosphere seemed to highlight the growing closeness between Charles and Kate. During the traditional Christmas morning walk to church, observers noticed how Charles and Kate walked side by side, deep in quiet conversation. While Camilla walked slightly behind with other family members, Kate had volunteered to help Charles with his Christmas broadcast preparation, offering suggestions about tone and content that would resonate with families across the nation. As they worked together in his study, surrounded by Christmas decorations and family photographs, their collaboration felt natural and productive. "I think people want to hear about hope and community spirit," Kate suggested as they reviewed the draft speech. "Perhaps we could mention how local communities have come together during difficult times this year." Charles nodded thoughtfully, making notes in the margins. "You have such insight into what people need to hear. Sometimes I get too caught up in the formal aspects and forget the human element." Their writing sessions had become something Charles looked forward to. Kate had a way of challenging his ideas gently, pushing him to be more personal and accessible without losing the dignity required of his position. She understood that being king in the modern era required a different approach than previous generations had used. During the family's Christmas Eve gathering, Charles surprised everyone by asking Kate to read a poem aloud to the assembled family. It was a tradition that had previously been Camilla's role, and the request created a moment of awkward silence before Kate graciously accepted. As Kate's clear voice filled the room with the beautiful words of the poem, Charles watched her with obvious appreciation and pride. She had a natural grace that made even formal moments feel warm and intimate. When she finished, Charles led the applause with genuine enthusiasm. Camilla maintained her composure throughout the evening, but later, in the privacy of her own room, she reflected on how the family dynamics were shifting. She wasn't being deliberately excluded, but she was certainly no longer at the center of Charles's attention, the way she had been in earlier years of their marriage. The next morning, as the family prepared for the traditional Christmas Day church service, Camilla made a decision that surprised everyone. She announced that she would not be attending due to a minor headache, suggesting that the family go ahead without her. "Are you certain you don't want to come?" Charles asked with genuine concern. "We could delay the departure if you need more time." Camilla smiled and waved away his worry. No, you all go ahead. I'll be fine with some rest. Kate can represent the women of the family beautifully." As the family left for church without her, Camilla watched from her window as Charles and Kate walked together toward the cars, their conversation animated and comfortable. She realized that her absence barely seemed to register with Charles. So absorbed was he in his discussion with Kate about the upcoming year's charitable initiatives. The church service itself became another opportunity for the public to observe the growing bond between Charles and Kate. They shared a hymnal, and Kate helped Charles find the right pages when he seemed confused by the order of service. Their easy companionship was evident to everyone present, and photographers captured numerous images of their warm interactions. After Christmas back in London, Charles began including Kate in meetings that had previously been exclusively his domain. When foreign dignitaries visited, Charles often invited Kate to join the conversations, valuing her fresh perspective on international relations and cultural exchange. During one such meeting with a delegation from a Commonwealth nation, Kate's questions about youth education programs led to a breakthrough in discussions about future collaborations. Charles was visibly impressed by her diplomatic instincts and her ability to find common ground with visitors from very different backgrounds. "You handled that beautifully," Charles told Kate after the delegation had departed. Your questions opened up possibilities I hadn't even considered. Kate appreciated the praise, but more than that, she valued the growing trust Charles was placing in her. She understood that he was sharing not just responsibilities, but also his vision for the future of the monarchy. The palace staff had also adapted to the new dynamic. Charles's private secretary began automatically including Kate in scheduling discussions for major events. The communications team sought her input on public statements and press releases. Even the household staff adjusted their routines to accommodate the increased frequency of Kate's presence in areas of the palace that had previously been primarily Camilla's domain. One particularly telling moment occurred during a planning meeting for an upcoming state banquet. Charles was reviewing the seating arrangements when he paused and asked, "Where have we placed Kate? I'd like her near me so we can discuss the evening's flow as it progresses." The aide quickly adjusted the seating plan, moving Kate from her original position with the younger royals to a seat directly adjacent to Charles. When Camilla's placement was mentioned, Charles simply nodded absently. His attention already moved on to other details. These small changes in protocol and attention might have seemed insignificant to outside observers, but within the carefully structured world of royal hierarchy, they represented a significant shift in influence and importance. Kate herself was not entirely comfortable with the changing dynamics. She was naturally diplomatic and had no desire to create tension within the family. However, she also recognized that Charles valued her input and that their collaboration was producing positive results for the monarchy and the causes they supported together. As winter turned to spring, the transformation in royal relationships had become unmistakable to anyone paying close attention. Charles and Kate had developed a working partnership that went far beyond the typical relationship between a monarch and a family member. While Camilla found herself adapting to a role that felt increasingly secondary, spring brought new challenges and opportunities for the royal family, and with them, more evidence of the deepening relationship between Charles and Kate. The planning for the king's official birthday celebrations became a perfect example of their collaborative approach to royal duties. Kate had suggested modernizing some elements of the traditional ceremony while maintaining its essential dignity and historical significance. She proposed involving more diverse community groups in the celebrations and creating opportunities for direct interaction between the royal family and the public. What if we included a section where local heroes could be recognized? Kate suggested during one of their planning sessions. Teachers, healthcare workers, volunteers who make real differences in their communities. Charles was immediately taken with the idea. "That's brilliant, Kate. It would show that we value everyday service, not just military or political achievements." Their enthusiasm for the project was infectious, and soon they were spending hours together refining the details. Charles found himself looking forward to these planning sessions more than almost any other royal obligation. Kate's creativity and practical wisdom made even routine tasks feel exciting and meaningful. Meanwhile, Camilla had begun developing her own separate schedule of engagements. Her causes, particularly literacy programs and support for domestic violence survivors, continued to receive her passionate attention. However, she noticed that media coverage of her work had diminished somewhat, with royal correspondents focusing more attention on the initiatives that Charles and Kate were developing together. During a literacy event at a local library, Camilla was asked by a journalist about her collaboration with other family members on educational initiatives. The question stung slightly, as it highlighted how her work had become somewhat isolated from the main royal narrative that increasingly centered on Charles and Kate's partnership. "I believe we all contribute to the family's work in our own ways," Camilla replied diplomatically. "Each of us brings different strengths and perspectives to our roles." But privately, Camilla was beginning to feel the weight of the changing dynamics. At home, Charles's conversations increasingly revolved around his projects with Kate. His excitement about their shared work was obvious, and Camilla found herself listening to detailed accounts of meetings and planning sessions that she had not been invited to join. One evening, as they prepared for bed, Charles was particularly animated about a new environmental education program he and Kate were designing. "She has such innovative ideas about reaching young people," he said, brushing his teeth. Today, she suggested using social media influencers to spread awareness about climate change. I never would have thought of that approach. Camilla listened politely, but she couldn't help feeling like an audience member rather than a partner in these conversations. The Charles she had fallen in love with years ago had been passionate about his causes, but he had never seemed quite so energized and optimistic as he did when discussing his work with Kate. The public had also begun to notice the shift in royal dynamics. Royal correspondents wrote articles analyzing the Kate effect on King Charles, noting how much more approachable and modern he seemed during their joint appearances. Photographs of Charles and Kate laughing together or engaged in serious conversation became increasingly common in newspapers and magazines. One particularly significant moment occurred during a visit to a sustainable farming initiative in Cornwall. Charles and Kate toured the facilities together, and their obvious chemistry and shared enthusiasm for environmental issues was captured in dozens of photographs. Charles seemed younger and more energetic than he had in years, while Kate's natural ability to connect with people from all backgrounds enhanced every interaction. "They make such a perfect team," commented one of the farmers they met. "You can see how much they both care about these issues, and they bring out the best in each other." That comment, published in a local newspaper and picked up by national media, encapsulated what many people were beginning to observe about Charles and Kate's relationship. Back at the palace, William had mixed feelings about his father and wife's growing closeness. On one hand, he was pleased that they got along so well, and that Kate was finding meaningful ways to contribute to royal duties. On the other hand, he sometimes felt like he was losing his wife to his father's causes and commitments. "You spend more time with Dad than you do with me these days," William joked one evening, though there was a hint of genuine concern in his voice. Kate laughed and squeezed his hand. "That's not true, but I do enjoy working with him. He has such a wealth of experience and wisdom to share." William understood and appreciated Kate's dedication to her royal role, but he couldn't help noticing how animated she became when discussing her projects with Charles. There was an intellectual and creative stimulation in their collaboration that seemed to energize Kate in ways that her other royal duties sometimes didn't. The children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, had also grown closer to their grandfather during this period. Charles made more effort to spend time with them, often including them in informal gatherings with Kate. The children seemed to enjoy these relaxed family moments, and Charles delighted in their company. "Grandpapa tells the best stories," Charlotte confided to Kate one afternoon after Charles had entertained them with tales of his own childhood adventures. Kate smiled, recognizing how Charles had softened and opened up around the children, largely because he felt more comfortable and confident in her presence. Their relationship had created a positive ripple effect throughout the family, making everyone feel more connected and at ease. As spring progressed into early summer, the transformation in royal relationships had become so pronounced that even international observers began commenting on the dynamic between Charles and Kate. Foreign diplomats noted how Charles increasingly deferred to Kate's opinions during official meetings, and how their collaborative approach seemed to be modernizing the monarchy's image on the world stage. The summer months brought an unexpected crisis that would further demonstrate the strength of the bond between Charles and Kate. A major charity that both the royal family and the government supported was accused of financial mismanagement, creating a public relations nightmare that required careful and immediate attention. Charles was initially overwhelmed by the complexity of the situation. The charity had been close to his heart for decades, and the allegations threatened to damage not only the organization, but also the royal family's reputation for supporting worthy causes. Kate found Charles in his study late one evening, surrounded by legal documents and press clippings, looking more stressed than she had ever seen him. Without hesitation, she canceled her own commitments for the following day and dedicated herself to helping him navigate the crisis. "We need to get ahead of this story," Kate said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "What matters most is protecting the people who benefit from the charity's work, regardless of what mistakes the leadership may have made." Over the next several days, Kate proved invaluable in managing the crisis. Her background in communications and her instinct for public relations helped Charles craft responses that were both honest and protective of the charity's mission. Together, they developed a strategy that separated the organization's important work from the alleged misconduct of its executives, Kate suggested that Charles make a personal visit to one of the charity's most successful programs, demonstrating his continued commitment to its beneficiaries while making it clear that accountability would be demanded from the leadership. The public needs to see that you care more about the people being served than about protecting the institution, Kate explained. Your genuine concern for the charity's mission will come through if we approach this correctly. Charles was deeply grateful for Kate's support during those difficult weeks. She worked tirelessly beside him, often late into the night, helping him prepare statements, review legal advice, and plan public appearances that would address the situation appropriately. The crisis management brought them even closer together, creating a level of trust and mutual dependence that went beyond their previous collaborations. Charles began to rely on Kate's judgment in ways that surprised even him, often asking for her opinion before making any significant decisions. Camilla watched the crisis unfold from the sidelines, offering support when asked but largely excluded from the intense planning sessions that Charles and Kate conducted. She understood that her skills were different from Kate's, but she couldn't help feeling somewhat useless during such an important moment for the family. When Charles and Kate returned from a particularly successful public appearance related to the charity crisis, Camilla greeted them at the palace entrance. "You both handled that beautifully," she said with genuine warmth, though she couldn't entirely hide the wistfulness in her voice. Charles barely acknowledged Camilla's comment, already turning to Kate to discuss their next steps. "Tomorrow we should follow up with the families we met today," he said enthusiastically. "Your suggestion about creating a direct communication channel was perfect." The successful resolution of the charity crisis further elevated Kate's status within the royal hierarchy. Palace staff, government officials, and even senior family members began to recognize her as someone whose opinion Charles valued above almost all others. During a family gathering at Balmoral that summer, the changed dynamics were impossible to ignore. Charles and Kate would often disappear together for long walks, discussing everything from policy matters to personal philosophy. When they returned, Charles would be energized and full of new ideas, while Kate would have the satisfied look of someone whose counsel had been valued and accepted. Princess Anne, who had always been somewhat reserved in her interactions with Kate, began to show newfound respect for her sister-in-law's influence with Charles. "She's good for him," Anne confided to a family friend. "I haven't seen him this confident and purposeful in years." Even the Queen's private secretary, who had served the family for decades, noted the positive changes in Charles's approach to his royal duties. "His Majesty seems more decisive and more connected to contemporary issues," he observed in a confidential memo. "The Princess of Wales appears to have a remarkably positive influence on his thinking." For Kate, the deepening relationship with Charles was both rewarding and challenging. She enjoyed their intellectual partnership and felt genuine affection for him as a person and father-in-law. However, she was also aware that their closeness was creating some tension within the family structure. During a quiet moment with William, Kate tried to address any concerns he might have about her relationship with his father. "I hope you don't feel like I'm overstepping my role," she said carefully. "Your father values my input and I want to be helpful, but not at the expense of family harmony." William reassured her that he supported their collaboration, but he also acknowledged that the situation was complex. Dad has always needed someone who could challenge him intellectually while still respecting his position, he explained. "You do that naturally, and it's making him a better king." However, William also admitted that he sometimes worried about his stepmother's feelings. "Camilla has worked so hard to find her place in this family, and I don't want her to feel displaced." Kate appreciated William's sensitivity to the situation, and she began making more conscious efforts to include Camilla in appropriate conversations and events. However, the natural chemistry between Kate and Charles was difficult to diminish, and their professional partnership continued to strengthen. As the summer drew to a close, palace insiders began referring to Charles and Kate as the dynamic duo of the royal family. Their joint appearances consistently received positive media coverage. Their collaborative initiatives showed impressive results, and their obvious mutual respect and affection had begun to reshape public perceptions of the monarchy. The transformation was so pronounced that foreign diplomats and international media began noting the Kate factor in British royal affairs. recognizing that she had become far more than just a supporting family member in the royal hierarchy. Autumn arrived with a series of events that would crystallize the new order within the royal family. The most significant was Charles's decision to ask Kate to accompany him on a major state visit to Canada, a trip that traditionally would have included Camilla as his primary companion. The announcement surprised many royal observers, as it represented a departure from established protocol. Charles's explanation was practical and straightforward. Catherine has been instrumental in developing our Commonwealth youth initiatives, and her presence will be vital for the success of this particular mission. While the reasoning was sound, the decision sent a clear message about Kate's elevated status within the royal hierarchy. Palace officials worked carefully to frame the trip as a focused working visit, rather than a traditional state occasion. But the symbolism was unmistakable. Camilla received the news with characteristic grace, publicly expressing her support for the mission's objectives. However, those close to her noticed a new quietness in her demeanor, a subtle withdrawal from the more public aspects of royal life. "I have my own commitments here that require attention," Camilla explained when asked about the Canada trip by a family friend. "The literacy programs I support need consistent focus, and I believe I can be most useful by maintaining that work." In reality, Camilla was beginning to consciously step back from competing for Charles's attention. She had recognized that the dynamic between Charles and Kate had evolved into something that she couldn't easily change or challenge. Rather than fighting a battle she was unlikely to win, she chose to focus on areas where she could make independent contributions. The Canada trip proved to be a remarkable success. Charles and Kate's natural partnership translated beautifully to the international stage. They complemented each other perfectly during official ceremonies, with Charles providing the gravitas and historical knowledge, while Kate brought energy and contemporary relevance to their interactions. During a visit to an Indigenous youth center in Vancouver, Kate's suggestion that they participate in a traditional drumming circle led to one of the most powerful moments of the trip. Charles, initially hesitant, followed Kate's lead and joined the young people in their cultural expression. The resulting photographs showed a monarch who was both respectful of tradition and open to new experiences. "She helps him be brave," observed one Canadian official, who worked closely with the royal delegation. "He trusts her judgment so completely that he's willing to take risks he might otherwise avoid." The trip included several moments that highlighted their intellectual partnership. During policy discussions with Canadian officials about climate change initiatives, Kate's questions often prompted Charles to explore ideas more deeply or consider perspectives he might have overlooked. Their hotel accommodations, while maintaining proper protocols, allowed for extensive private consultations. Each evening, Charles and Kate would review the day's events and plan for upcoming engagements, their conversations ranging from diplomatic strategies to personal reflections on the people they had met. "I learn something new from you every day," Charles told Kate during one of these evening discussions. "You have a gift for seeing the human element in every situation." Kate was touched by his words, but she also recognized the weight of responsibility that came with Charles's trust. She understood that their relationship had evolved beyond typical family bonds into something that could significantly influence the future direction of the monarchy. Back in London, Camilla was using the time alone to reassess her own role and priorities. She had always been someone who adapted well to changing circumstances, and she began to see opportunities in her evolving position within the family structure. Without the pressure of being Charles's primary advisor and companion, Camilla found new freedom to pursue causes that genuinely passionate her. She expanded her literacy work, took on more responsibilities with domestic violence charities, and began developing programs that were uniquely her own, rather than collaborative family efforts. During a particularly successful event for adult literacy, Camilla felt a sense of personal satisfaction that she hadn't experienced in months. The program she had developed was making real differences in people's lives, and she was receiving recognition for her individual contributions rather than as part of a royal partnership. "This feels right," she confided to her private secretary. "I think I've been trying too hard to be something I'm not, instead of focusing on what I do best." When Charles and Kate returned from Canada, the palace atmosphere reflected the new equilibrium that was establishing itself. Charles was energized by the trip's success and full of plans for future initiatives that he and Kate had discussed. Kate glowed with the confidence that came from knowing she had truly contributed to an important royal mission. Camilla greeted them warmly and listened with genuine interest to their accounts of the trip. She had reached a place of acceptance about the changing family dynamics, and her lack of resentment or competition made the homecoming comfortable for everyone. "You both look wonderful," Camilla said, as they gathered for tea in Charles's private sitting room. "I can see that the trip was everything you hoped it would be." Charles, perhaps sensing some of the complexity of the situation, made special efforts to ask Camilla about her own recent work. He praised her literacy initiatives and showed genuine interest in her plans for expanding the programs. However, the easy intimacy between Charles and Kate was now so natural that it continued even in Camilla's presence. They would exchange glances of understanding, finish each other's sentences when describing their Canadian experiences, and automatically turn to each other for confirmation or elaboration on various points. The new family dynamic was not hostile or deliberately exclusive, but it was unmistakably different from what had existed before. Charles and Kate had become a working team whose partnership extended far beyond formal royal duties into a realm of personal trust and intellectual companionship. As winter approached, royal watchers began to recognize that a fundamental shift had occurred within the British royal family. The relationship between King Charles and Catherine, Princess of Wales, had evolved into something unprecedented in modern royal history, a father-in-law and daughter-in-law whose bond had become central to the monarchy's direction and success. The winter months brought a quiet settling into the new reality of royal family relationships. The transformation that had begun with simple weekly meetings between Charles and Kate had evolved into a partnership that now formed the backbone of the monarchy's most important initiatives. Christmas at Sandringham that year told the complete story of how far things had changed. During the family's traditional Christmas Eve dinner, Charles asked Kate to deliver the blessing before the meal, a role that held deep personal and symbolic significance within the family's private traditions. Kate's words were thoughtful and inclusive, expressing gratitude for family bonds and hoping for peace and understanding in the coming year. As she spoke, Charles watched her with obvious pride and affection, while Camilla listened with the grace of someone who had found peace with her evolving role. After dinner, as the family gathered around the piano for carol singing, another small but meaningful moment occurred. Charles naturally positioned himself next to Kate for the singing, and their voices blended harmoniously as they sang traditional Christmas carols. Camilla joined in from across the room, her own lovely voice adding to the family chorus. But the physical positioning told its own story about the family's new dynamic. The children, now comfortable with their grandfather's increased presence in their lives, clustered around Charles and Kate during the evening's festivities. George had begun asking Charles about the history of various royal traditions, while Charlotte and Louis enjoyed the stories and games that Charles seemed more willing to share when Kate was present to encourage his playful side. William observed these family moments with mixed emotions. He was genuinely happy to see his father so content and engaged, and he appreciated how Kate's influence had made Charles more approachable and modern in his thinking. However, he also felt a complex sense of loss, as if he was sharing his wife with his father in ways he hadn't expected when he married her. "Sometimes I feel like I have to make an appointment to spend time with my own wife," William joked to Harry during one of their conversations, though the humor didn't entirely mask his underlying feelings. Harry, with his characteristic directness, offered a different perspective. Maybe Dad just needed someone who could help him figure out how to be the kind of king he wanted to be. Kate's good at bringing out the best in people. The public had also fully embraced the partnership between Charles and Kate. Opinion polls showed increased approval ratings for the monarchy, with many respondents specifically citing the positive influence that Kate appeared to have on the king's approach to royal duties. Royal biographers and commentators began writing about the Kate effect as a defining characteristic of Charles's reign. Her ability to modernize his approach while maintaining respect for tradition was seen as exactly what the monarchy needed to remain relevant in the contemporary world. She's helped him bridge the gap between the institution he inherited and the institution the country needs, wrote one respected royal correspondent. Their partnership represents the best possible evolution of the modern monarchy. For Kate herself, the year had brought unexpected fulfillment and challenge. She had discovered abilities and interests she hadn't known she possessed, and she had developed a relationship with Charles that was intellectually stimulating and personally meaningful. However, she was also aware of the complexities her elevated role had created within the family. During a quiet moment alone with Camilla, Kate tried to address some of these complexities directly. "I hope you know that I have tremendous respect for everything you've accomplished," Kate said carefully. "I never intended for our work together to overshadow your own contributions to the family." Camilla smiled with genuine warmth. "My dear, you haven't overshadowed anything. You've simply found your own path, and it happens to align perfectly with Charles's needs right now. I'm proud of what you've achieved together." The conversation was healing for both women, allowing them to acknowledge the changed circumstances while maintaining mutual respect and affection. Camilla had indeed found peace with her evolving role, recognizing that her own contributions to the family remained valuable even if they were less central to Charles's daily focus. As the new year began, the royal family had settled into a rhythm that reflected their new reality. Charles and Kate continued their close collaboration on major initiatives, their partnership now so natural that palace staff automatically included both of them in planning for significant events and decisions. Camilla had successfully carved out her own sphere of influence, focusing on causes where she could make independent and meaningful contributions. Her work with literacy programs and domestic violence charities had expanded significantly, and she was receiving recognition for her individual efforts rather than as part of a royal couple. The family gatherings had also adapted to accommodate the new dynamics. Charles and Kate would often engage in intense discussions about policy matters or upcoming events, while Camilla would contribute, when her expertise was relevant but otherwise, focus on other family members and conversations. William had learned to appreciate the positive aspects of his father and wife's partnership while also making sure to maintain his own close relationship with Kate. The children had benefited from having a grandfather who was more present and engaged, thanks largely to Kate's influence on his comfort with family interactions. Looking back on the transformation, it was clear that what had begun as a simple meeting of minds between Charles and Kate had evolved into something much more significant. Their relationship had become a driving force for positive change within the monarchy, helping to modernize the institution while maintaining its essential dignity and purpose. In a story of King Charles growing closer to Kate while Camilla quietly faded from the spotlight, was not one of deliberate displacement or family conflict. Instead, it was a natural evolution of relationships and roles, with each person finding their place in a new family structure that ultimately served both the institution of the monarchy and the individual needs of its members. As winter gave way to spring, the royal family looked forward to a future shaped by the strong partnership between Charles and Kate, supported by Camilla's independent contributions, and strengthened by the understanding that sometimes the most profound changes happen not through dramatic events, but through the quiet, steady evolution of human relationships and mutual respect.